He woke up in the cold dawn without memory, without identity, without knowing who he was. Lost in the streets of New York, everyone ignored him, until a simple woman decided to help him. But when his past began to return, he discovered that his life was much bigger than he could imagine. The dawn crept through the streets of New York like an icy blanket, enveloping every corner, every alley, every lonely soul wandering through the city. The clock at Times Square showed 3:15 in the morning when he opened his eyes. The first sensation was total disorientation, followed by a searing pain that crossed his head from side to side. He tried to stand up, but his limbs trembled, like leaves in the wind. The clothes he wore, a suit that must have once been elegant, were dirty and torn, stuck to his body by the cold sweat of the night. His shoes, probably once Italian, were now nothing more than a pair of worn and muddy leather. Where am I? He muttered to himself, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't used it for days. But the most important question wasn't where, but who. His name, his history, his identity, everything had disappeared like fog at dawn. His mind was an absolute void, a blank canvas where memories should have been. People passed by hurriedly, some averting their gaze, others barely noticing his presence. In the metropolis that never sleeps, he was just another body fallen on the sidewalk, another story that nobody wanted to know. The cutting cold of the New York dawn penetrated his bones, making him shiver uncontrollably. That's when a pair of worn shoes stopped in front of him. Different from others who passed by hurriedly, these remained there. He slowly raised his eyes, following the legs covered by simple uniform pants, until he found the face that would change his life forever. Sarah Thompson, 35 years old, held a worn bag and wore the light blue uniform of the restaurant where she worked as a cleaner. Her brown eyes, though tired after a long work shift, emanated a kindness that seemed to illuminate the darkness around. She crouched down, maintaining a safe distance, but close enough for him to hear her soft voice. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need help?" The question hung in the air like an offering of hope. He tried to answer, but his throat was too dry. Sarah took a water bottle from her bag and offered it to him, which he drank eagerly. I don't know who I am," he finally managed to say, the words coming out broken. "I don't remember anything." Sarah hesitated for a moment. Her life was already difficult enough. The late rent, the bills piling up, the exhausting work at the restaurant that barely paid her expenses. But something about that man touched her heart. Maybe it was the vulnerability in his eyes, or maybe it was just her compassionate nature that wouldn't allow her to leave someone in need. "Come with me," she said, extending her hand. "I can't leave you here in this cold." He hesitated, looking at that outstretched hand as if it were something surreal. In his confused state, that gesture of kindness seemed as extraordinary as it was inexplicable. With difficulty, he managed to stand up, leaning against the wall. The journey to Sarah's house was long. They took 2 buses and walked a few blocks, until they reached a narrow alley in the outskirts of the city. The small apartment where she lived was small but clean and organized. The bare brick walls and the old roof tiles told the story of a life of struggle and perseverance. "It's not much," she said, opening the door, "but it's better than the street." The interior was simple, a small living room that also served as a kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. The furniture was sparse and worn, but there was special care in every detail, from the patched curtains to the plants in recycled cans on the window. Sarah prepared strong coffee and set aside some old clothes that belonged to her brother, who had moved to another state. While he showered and changed, she improvised a bed on the living room couch. "Tomorrow we can try to find out more about you," she said, arranging a blanket on the couch. "For now, rest." Lying on that simple couch, he observed the peeling ceiling, trying to force his mind to remember something, anything. But the only images that came were confused and hazy, like a dream that escapes upon waking. The sound of rain that began to fall outside created a melancholic melody, cradling his scattered thoughts. Sarah, in her room, also couldn't sleep. She questioned whether she had done the right thing by bringing a stranger home. But something in her heart said that this man needed help and she couldn't live with herself if she had abandoned him on the street. The hours of dawn dragged on slowly. In the living room, he finally managed to fall asleep, lulled by fatigue and the sense of security that small home provided. In his restless dreams, fragments of memories danced like shadows. A luxurious office, important papers, people in expensive suits. But upon waking, everything dissipated like smoke. The next day dawned grey and cold, typical of New York winter. Sarah woke up early, as always, to prepare coffee before going to work. She found her guest already awake, sitting on the couch with his gaze lost through the window. "Did you sleep well?" she asked while putting water to boil. "Yes, thank you," he replied, his voice still hoarse. "I don't know how to thank you." "No, need to thank," she smiled, placing 2 cups on the table. "Sometimes we all need a helping hand." As they drank coffee, Sarah explained that she would need to go to work, but that he could stay there. She left separated food and some clean clothes. Before leaving, she wrote her phone number on a piece of paper in case he needed anything. "I'll try to leave earlier today," she said, adjusting her uniform. "We can go to the police station, see if there's any missing person report that matches your description." He nodded, grateful for the help, but something inside him stirred restlessly. A part of his mind seemed to want to keep the memories locked away, as if there was something important, perhaps even dangerous, hidden in his past. Sarah left for another day of work, leaving him alone with his hazy thoughts. The hours dragged on as he explored the small space, observing every detail. The photographs on the wall showing Sarah with an older lady, probably her mother, the worn books on a small shelf, the calendar on the wall marking payday. Each object told a story of a simple but dignified life, a life so different from what he suspected he had, although he couldn't be sure. His hands, even without memory, betrayed that they were not hands accustomed to heavy work. His gestures, his posture, everything indicated an origin different from that environment. The day slowly advanced, and with it grew a certainty in his heart. Regardless of who he was or where he came from, that woman, Sarah, with her selfless kindness, had given him more than a roof. She had given him a chance to start over. The days that followed established a peculiar routine in that simple apartment in the outskirts. Sarah left early for work, leaving coffee ready and some basic instructions for her mysterious guest. He, in turn, began to find ways to make himself useful, even with his mind still shrouded in fog. On a particularly cold morning, while Sarah was preparing coffee, the kitchen sink faucet began to leak. Without thinking twice, he approached, examined the problem, and with precise and confident movements, fixed the leak using only some basic tools he found in an old box. "How did you know how to do that?" Sarah asked, impressed. "I don't know," he replied, looking at his own hands as if they held secrets. "My fingers seem to know what to do, even if my mind didn't remember." That small incident was just the beginning. Gradually, other skills began to emerge naturally. The way he organized the house bills in an improvised spreadsheet, how he managed to fix electronic devices with ease, and especially how his vocabulary and posture betrayed a refined education, even if he didn't remember receiving it. Sarah observed everything with a mixture of fascination and concern. During the nights, after long days of work, they talked in the small kitchen. She told about her life, the mother who had raised 3 children alone, the siblings who had moved to other states in search of better opportunities, the dreams she had been forced to postpone to survive. "I always wanted to study nursing," she confessed one night while preparing chamomile tea. "But life had other plans. After Mum got sick, I had to take over the household bills." He listened to her with genuine attention, absorbing every word, every gesture. There was something in Sarah's simplicity and honesty that touched him deeply. It was as if, through her stories, he was also trying to reconstruct his own lost narrative. At the restaurant where she worked, Sarah began to notice positive changes. The owner of the establishment, Mr. Johnson, a grumpy but good-hearted man, was impressed with the improvements that appeared after she mentioned a friend who understood maintenance. "This friend of yours," Mr. Johnson said one day, "is he looking for work? The industrial refrigerator is acting up again, and these technicians charge a fortune." Sarah conveyed the offer, and so he began to do small jobs at the restaurant. His technical skills were impressive, and soon he was helping not only with repairs, but also with the organization of the establishment. One day, while working in the restaurant kitchen, he found himself admiring the reflection of his hands on a stainless steel tray. They were well cared for hands with small, almost imperceptible surgical scars, which contrasted with the recent work marks. At that moment, a fleeting memory crossed his mind. He was in an elegant meeting room, signing important documents. The memory left him dizzy, forcing him to lean on the counter. Sarah, who was passing by, noticed his disturbance. "Are you okay?" she asked, gently touching his arm. "Yes, I think I remembered something. A room, documents, but it's all so hazy." Sarah observed him with concern. In the past few weeks, episodes like this had become more frequent. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night, agitated, talking about important meetings and urgent decisions. At other times, he found himself staring fixedly at the newspaper Mr. Johnson left at the restaurant, especially at the business pages, as if something there was familiar. One afternoon, while organizing some restaurant papers, he came across a news story about an important corporate merger. His eyes fixed on the photo of the CEO of a large conglomerate, and for a moment, he felt a familiar vertigo. There was something in that corporate world that reverberated in his mind like a distant echo. Sarah, always attentive, began to keep newspaper clippings that talked about missing persons or that brought news from the business world. At night after work, they examined each clipping together, looking for clues that might awaken some memory. "Sometimes," she said one night, "I'm afraid that when you regain your memory, you'll discover that you have a completely different life from the one we're living here." He held her hand for a moment, surprising them both with the gesture. "Whatever my past is, Sarah, I'll never forget what you've done for me." The touch of hands, the shared look, created a moment of intimacy that neither of them expected. Sarah gently withdrew her hand, a delicate blush tinting her cheeks. He in turn felt his heart race in a way that had nothing to do with lost memories. The days went by, and the routine they established began to take on contours of normality. He helped more and more at the restaurant, and his talent for organization and management did not go unnoticed. Mr. Johnson began to consult him on important business decisions, and the improvements were visible. However, as his presence became more noticed in the neighborhood, a silent fear began to grow in his chest. What if someone recognized him? What if his past suddenly came to light? More than that, he began to fear that the truth, when revealed, could destroy the delicate happiness he had found in that simple life. One night, after a particularly tiring day, Sarah found him sitting on the small balcony, looking at the city lights in the distance. "What are you thinking about?" "Thinking?" she asked, sitting beside him. "About how strange life is," he replied without taking his eyes off the horizon. "I lost all my memories, but I've never felt so at peace." Sarah smiled, understanding. Sometimes starting from scratch isn't so bad. But as they talked under the stars that night, neither of them could imagine that the past was about to knock on their door, bringing revelations that would change their lives forever. Fate, in its infinite irony, was just waiting for the right moment to reveal its cards. Mr. Johnson's restaurant was busier than usual that Saturday morning. The aroma of fresh coffee and freshly baked bread filled the air as the first customers began to arrive for breakfast. Sarah organized the tables with her usual efficiency, and he, whom everyone now called Michael, a name he had chosen himself because it sounded familiar, was adjusting the new coffee machine he had fixed the week before. That's when she walked. Jin, an elegant lady dressed in designer clothes and discreet but visibly expensive jewelry. Her bearing and manner of carrying herself completely contrasted with the simple environment of the neighborhood restaurant. She sat at one of the tables near the counter, and while waiting for service took a business newspaper out of her bag. Michael had his back turned, focused on his work, when the lady's voice cut through the air like a sure arrow. "Waiter, please. An espresso and, oh my God!" The restrained scream made everyone in the restaurant turn around. The lady had dropped the newspaper, her hands were shaking, and her face was as pale as wax. Her eyes fixed on Michael, who was now turning to attend to her. "Daniel? Daniel, is that you?" The name hit Michael like lightning. His head began to throb, and disconnected images invaded his mind. Meetings in luxurious rooms, dinners in refined restaurants, important documents being signed. Sarah, who was observing the scene from afar, quickly approached when she saw her friend staggering. The lady stood up with a start, ignoring the coffee spilled on the table. "It can't be. You disappeared months ago. Everyone thought that—" Before she could finish the sentence, Michael felt his legs weaken. Sarah supported him, helping him to sit down. Mr. Johnson, noticing the commotion, quickly approached. "Ma'am, please, he's not well," Sarah explained, her voice firm but gentle. "He lost his memory. He doesn't remember anything from his past." The lady, still in shock, sat down again, her teary eyes never leaving Michael's face. "Lost his memory? But you're Daniel Harrison, CEO of Harrison Enterprises. Your disappearance was news in all the papers." The entire restaurant seemed to have frozen. Customers observed the scene in absolute silence, while Sarah felt her heart tighten. She had always known this day would come, that Michael's true identity would be revealed, but she wasn't prepared for the reality that was unfolding. Michael, or Daniel, remained silent, his mind a storm of memory fragments that were beginning to fit together like pieces of a painful puzzle. Images of his previous life began to emerge. The office on the top floor of the tallest building on Wall Street, board meetings, business dinners, his family. I don't remember," he finally managed to say, his voice trembling. "Just flashes, loose images." The lady, who introduced herself as Eleanor Walters, a member of the board of directors of Harrison Enterprises, spent the next few hours recounting the story of Daniel's disappearance. How he had mysteriously vanished after an important business meeting, how his family had moved heaven and earth to find him, how everyone feared the worst. Sarah listened in silence, her heart divided between the joy of seeing her friend finally, discovering his identity, and the fear of losing him forever. Eleanor's words revealed a world completely different from the one they had shared in recent months, a world of power, money, and responsibilities. "I need to inform your family immediately," Eleanor said, taking out her cell phone. "Your wife, ex-wife actually, will be relieved to know you're alive." "Ex-wife? Michael, now Daniel?" asked, his voice distant. "Yes, Amanda. You were in the process of divorcing when you disappeared. It was a scandal at the time, with all those accusations." Eleanor stopped abruptly, realizing that perhaps she was revealing too much information at once. Daniel closed his eyes, trying to process it all. Sarah, noticing his discomfort, intervened. "I think that's enough information for today. He needs to rest." Mr. Johnson, who had witnessed the entire scene in silence, offered his office so they could talk more privately. Eleanor reluctantly agreed to postpone the calls to the family, recognizing that the situation required delicacy. In the hours that followed, Daniel remained silent, lost in his thoughts, while Sarah continued her work, casting worried glances in his direction. The restaurant gradually returned to its normal routine, but an air of tension hung in the environment. At the end of the day, as they were closing the restaurant, Sarah found Daniel still sitting in Mr. Johnson's office, staring fixedly at a business card that Eleanor had left. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly, sitting next to him. "Confused," he answered, his voice low. "It's as if I were two different people now. Michael, who found peace and purpose here, and Daniel, with a life that seems to belong to someone else." Sarah placed her hand on his in a gesture of comfort. "You don't have to decide anything now. You can take all the time you need." He looked at their joined hands, feeling the warmth and sincerity of that simple touch. How could he choose between two such different worlds? Between power and simplicity, between luxury and authenticity. "Sarah," he began, his voice choked. But before he could continue, Eleanor's cell phone, which she had left with her number, began to ring. On the screen, a name flashed insistently: Amanda Harrison. The sound of the phone echoed through the empty office like a harbinger of storm. Sarah gently withdrew her hand, standing up. "You need to answer," she said, her voice trying to hide the emotion. "It's your life calling." Daniel watched Sarah leave the office, his heart divided between the past that was beginning to reveal itself and the present he had learned to love. The phone kept ringing, demanding a decision that would change not only his life, but also that of everyone around him. Amanda's phone call lasted exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds, but to Daniel it seemed like an eternity. His ex-wife, upon hearing his voice, alternated between sobs of relief and anxious questions. He responded mechanically, his mind still trying to process the avalanche of information and emotions of the day. "I need to see you," Amanda insisted. "Everyone needs to see you. Your mother. You can't imagine how she suffered." Daniel hung up the phone with the promise of a meeting the next day. Eleanor had offered to mediate everything, suggesting a first meeting in a neutral place, the office of Richard Walters, the family's lawyer and his longtime friend. When he left Mr. Johnson's office, he found the restaurant already closed and silent. Sarah was finishing organizing the last tables, her face partially hidden by the twilight of the environment. She raised her eyes when she heard him approach, and for a moment, neither knew what to say. "Do you want to talk?" she finally asked, her soft voice breaking the silence. They left the restaurant together and walked to a small nearby park. The night air was fresh, and the city lights created an almost unreal setting for the conversation they needed to have. "Tomorrow I'm going to meet my family," he began, the words sounding strange in his mouth, "at a lawyer's office downtown." Sarah nodded, sitting on one of the park benches. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm living in a movie," he replied, running his hands over his face. "Jack Elliott, president of one of the largest business groups in the country. It seems like a story someone made up." "But it's your story," Sarah said softly. "The life you had before." "The life I had," he repeated thoughtfully. "But is it the life I want to go back to?" Sarah looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean? It's your family, your company." "In the last few months," he interrupted, turning to face her, "I've learned more about happiness and real value than I probably learned in all the years running that empire. Here, just being Michael, I discovered a peace I didn't know existed." The night wind rustled the leaves of the trees, bringing with it the distant sound of the city. Sarah felt her heart quicken at his words, but reality weighed on her shoulders. "Jack," she said, using his real name for the first time, "you have responsibilities. People depend on you, on your company." "What about the people here?" he questioned. "Mr. Johnson, who trusted me to help in the restaurant. You, who took me in when I was nothing but a stranger on the street." Sarah stood up, walking a few steps. When she turned, her eyes shone with contained tears. "We can't pretend nothing has changed," she said firmly. "You're Jack Elliott. You have a family that suffered from your disappearance, a company that needs you, an entire life that you can't simply ignore." He also stood up, approaching her. "What if I don't want to go back to being that person? What if the Jack they knew doesn't exist anymore?" "You can't run away from who you are," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Besides, you need to find out what happened, how you lost your memory, why you disappeared." The silence that followed was filled by the sound of an ambulance passing in the distance. Jack felt the weight of reality bearing down on his shoulders. Sarah was right. There were questions that needed to be answered, responsibilities that couldn't be ignored. The next morning, Sarah woke up earlier than usual. She found Jack. It was still hard to think of him as Jack, already awake, wearing the best clothes they could find for the meeting with the family. "Let me fix your tie," she said, approaching. It was one of the few pieces of clothing they had managed to recover from his original outfit when she found him on the street. As she adjusted the knot of the tie, her fingers lightly brushed his neck. For a moment their gazes met, and all that was unsaid between them seemed to weigh in the air. "Sarah, No," she interrupted him gently. "Don't say anything now. First, you need to face your past." The office of lawyer Richard Palmer occupied the entire 20th floor of an imposing building in the heart of New York's financial district. When Jack arrived, accompanied by Amanda, he felt his heart race as he saw the familiar logo of the Elliott Group in the building's lobby. In the meeting room, familiar faces awaited him. His mother, Helen Elliott, an elegant lady who barely contained her tears upon seeing him, his ex-wife, Melissa, still stunning in her impeccable tailored suit, and Richard Palmer, the family lawyer, who observed him. With an expression difficult to decipher, "My son," Helen sobbed, hugging him. "I thought I had lost you forever." His mother's embrace triggered a new wave of memories, family Christmases, heated discussions about the future of the company, the weight of expectations he had always carried on his shoulders. Melissa kept her distance, her green eyes studying him carefully. "You're different," she commented. "Ladies," Richard intervened softly, "we need to discuss some practical matters. Jack, your disappearance caused serious legal and business complications." The next few hours were filled with explanations about the current state of the company, decisions that needed to be made, documents that needed to be signed. Jack listened to everything with a growing sense of discomfort, as if he were watching a movie about someone else's life. "There's something I need to tell you," Melissa said suddenly, her voice cutting through Richard's explanations. "Something you need to know before making any decision." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with tension. Jack felt he was about to discover another piece of the puzzle of his past, a piece that could change everything again. Melissa adjusted herself in the leather chair of the meeting room, her fingers nervously tapping on the polished surface of the table. The afternoon sun coming through the panoramic windows created a golden glow on her wedding ring, which Jack noticed with surprise she was still wearing. "On the day you disappeared," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I had scheduled an important dinner, a dinner where I intended to tell you something that would change our lives." Helen Elliott held her son's hand as if trying to anchor him to the present moment. Amanda and Richard exchanged significant looks as if they already knew what was coming. "I'm pregnant, Jack," Melissa announced, her green eyes misty. 3 months when you disappeared. Now our child is almost a year old." The impact of the revelation hit Jack like a wave. A child he didn't know existed, born during his disappearance. His mind was spinning with this new information, trying to process another piece of the puzzle of his previous life. "A child?" he managed to stammer, his voice almost a whisper. "A girl," Melissa completed, a sad smile playing on her lips. "Sophia, she has your eyes." Helen squeezed Jack's hand tighter, her tears now flowing freely. "Your daughter is beautiful, my son. She's been the light of our days since we lost you." The images began to flow in his mind. The divorce process, the heated arguments, the disagreements about the future of the company. Now he understood why Melissa was still wearing the ring. She discovered the pregnancy in the midst of the separation. "Why?" he asked, looking directly at Melissa. "Why didn't you tell me before the whole divorce process?" "Because I found out on the day you made the decision to sell part of the company," she replied, her voice laden with emotion. "You were determined to distance yourself from everything, saying you needed to find your own path, away from the family pressure. I feared that the news of the pregnancy would make you stay out of obligation." Richard cleared his throat, intervening softly. "Jack, on the day of your disappearance, you had scheduled a meeting with me. I called to reschedule, saying Melissa needed to talk to you urgently. You said you had one last thing to resolve, and then you'd meet her for dinner." "But you never made it to dinner," Melissa completed, her voice choked. "You simply disappeared." Jack closed his eyes, fragments of memory beginning to fit together. He remembered a heated discussion, important papers, a crucial decision about the future of the company. After that, only darkness. "Sophia," he murmured his daughter's name, feeling the weight of this new reality. Where is she now? With my mother, Melissa answered. I brought some photos if you want to see. With trembling hands, she took an envelope from her purse. The photograph showed a smiling baby, with eyes identical to his and golden curls like her mother's. In one of the photos, she was sitting on Helen's lap, both smiling at the camera. She's perfect, Jack whispered, touching the photograph with his fingertips. The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of Jack's cell phone, the number Amanda had given him. It was a message from Sarah. Hope everything is going well. Mr. Johnson asked if you're coming today to help with the industrial refrigerator. The reality of his two lives collided at that moment with full force. On one side, his newly discovered daughter, his business family, a corporate empire awaiting crucial decisions. On the other, the simplicity and honesty of his life with Sarah, Mr. Johnson's restaurant, the peace he found in simplicity. We need to resolve some practical issues, Richard commented, opening a folder full of documents. Your absence has generated significant complications in the management of the company. There are important pending decisions. And Sophia needs her father, Melissa added softly. She deserves to know you, Jack. Helen, sensing her son's emotional turmoil, intervened. Perhaps we should give Jack some time. It's a lot of information to process at once. Time is something we don't have much of, Amanda commented, her professional voice masking her concern. The shareholders' meeting is scheduled for next week. We need a clear position on the company's leadership. Jack stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Down below, the city stretched out, imposing and indifferent to the dramas unfolding on the 20th floor. Somewhere, in that immensity of buildings, Sarah was probably working, worried about him. I need some air, he finally said. I need to think. Jack, Melissa called, her voice soft. I know it's a lot to absorb, but Sophia, she asks about you know. Even being so small, she feels that something is missing. Melissa's words hit his heart like precise arrows. The idea of a small life that depended on him, that waited for him without even knowing him, weighed on his conscience. Can I see her? He asked, his voice trembling. Of course, Melissa replied, a genuine smile lighting up her face for the first time. Whenever you want. Leaving Richard's office, Jack felt as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His daughter, the company, Sarah, all these lives and responsibilities intertwined in an impossible knot to untie. He took a taxi and, without thinking, gave the address of Mr. Johnson's restaurant. He needed to see Sarah. He needed the clarity that only her presence seemed to provide. But how to explain to her that now he was not just Jack Elliott, the businessman, but also a father? The taxi snaked through New York's chaotic traffic, taking him back to the simple world he had built over the last few months. But now that world seemed irremediably altered by the truth of his past, a past that included a little Sophia, who somewhere in the city was waiting to meet her father. The restaurant was quiet when Jack arrived. The lunch hour had already passed, and only a few late customers occupied the tables. Sarah was organizing the counter when she saw him enter, his tired face and loose tie betraying the weight of the day. I solved the refrigerator, she said, trying to maintain a casual tone. Mr. Johnson managed to get a technician. Jack nodded distractedly, his eyes scanning the familiar environment that somehow seemed different now. Every detail, the Formica tables, the ceiling fan turning lazily, the aroma of coffee, everything seemed both precious and distant. I need to tell you something, he finally said. Can we talk? Sarah led him to the small area at the back of the restaurant where Mr. Johnson kept a small garden. It was a quiet space with some potted plants and 2 wooden benches. The noise of the city arrived muffled there, creating a bubble of privacy. I have a daughter, he said without preamble, the words coming out as if they needed to be freed. Sophia. She's almost a year old. Sarah sat down slowly, her face a mask of contained surprise. A daughter? Melissa was pregnant when I disappeared. She was going to tell me that night, the night I lost my memory. The silence that followed was filled only by the distant sound of traffic and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Sarah processed the information, her hands distractedly squeezing her apron. "What is she like?" she finally asked, her voice soft. Jack took the photos from his pocket, still crumpled from how much he had held them in the taxi. Sarah examined them carefully, a small smile forming on her lips. "She has your eyes," she commented, gently touching the photograph. "That's what Melissa said." Sarah returned the photos, her fingers lightly brushing his during the action. "What are you going to do now?" The question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken meanings. Jack ran his hands over his face, the fatigue and confusion evident in every gesture. "I don't know," he admitted. "The company needs urgent decisions. There's a shareholders meeting next week, and now there's Sophia." "A child changes everything," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying a wisdom that came from her own life story. "She needs her father." "Sarah, No," she gently interrupted him. "Don't say anything now. You need to meet your daughter. You need to understand what it means to be Jack Elliott again." At that moment, Mr. Johnson appeared at the back door, his face concerned when he saw the two there. Jack," he called, still getting used to the new name. "That elegant lady is here again, Miss Amanda." Jack stood up, instinctively, adjusting his tie. Amanda probably brought more documents, more urgent decisions, more pieces of his previous life that needed to be reorganized. "Go," Sarah said, also standing up. "Your life is calling you." Amanda was sitting at one of the restaurant tables, a folder of documents in front of her. Her face lit up when she saw Jack. "Sorry for coming here," she said, "but we need to resolve some urgent issues, and Melissa asked if you'd like to meet Sophia tomorrow." Jack's heart raced. "Tomorrow?" "Yes." She thought of something simple, maybe in the park near her house, a more relaxed environment for a first meeting. Sarah, who was organizing the tables nearby, couldn't help but overhear the conversation. Her heart tightened, but she kept her face serene, continuing her work as if she hadn't heard anything. "Okay," Jack replied after a moment. "Tomorrow then." After Amanda left, leaving a pile of documents that needed to be reviewed, Jack remained seated, staring into space. Sarah approached, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. "Coffee always helps to think," she said with a small smile. "Sarah," he began, his voice laden with emotion, "these last few months, everything we've lived were real," she completed. "Every moment was real. But now you have a new reality to face, a reality that includes a small person who needs you." "And what about us?" The question hung in the air, heavy with possibilities and impossibilities. Sarah took a deep breath, gathering all her inner strength. "There is no us now, Jack. There's you, your daughter, your family, your company. You need to rediscover who Jack Elliott is before thinking about anything else." Her words, though, gentle, carried a painful truth. Jack knew she was right, but that didn't make the situation any less difficult. "Tomorrow," she continued, "you're going to meet your daughter. Focus on that. Sophia deserves to know the wonderful father you can be." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of contained emotions and unspoken words. Sarah continued her work, efficient as always, but her eyes betrayed the sadness she tried to hide. Jack alternated between reviewing the documents left by Amanda and discreetly observing Sarah, his heart divided between what had been and what needed to be. When night came and the restaurant began to empty, Jack realized he could no longer postpone the inevitable. He needed to prepare for the next day, for the moment he would meet his daughter. "I'm going home," he said, standing up. The word home sounded strange now. Was Sarah's house still his home? "Good luck tomorrow, Sarah," replied, her voice soft. "Sophia will love meeting her father." Before leaving, Jack stopped at the door, turning to look one last time at the environment that had been his refuge for the last few months. Sarah was there, illuminated by the soft light of the late afternoon, her face revealing a mixture of love and resignation that broke his heart. "Sarah, everything will be all right," she smiled, though her eyes shone with contained tears. "Some stories are more important than others, and the story of a father meeting his daughter, that's The most important of all. Central Park was awakening with the city on that Saturday morning. The winter sun shone softly between the trees, creating patterns of light and shadow on the well-kept lawn. Jack arrived half an hour before the agreed time, his hands cold, sweating, as he held a small teddy bear he had bought on the way. He had spent the night awake, staying at a hotel suggested by Amanda. The idea of returning to the family mansion still seemed premature, and Sarah's house, well, that chapter needed a proper ending. Now, sitting on a park bench, he watched the families that were starting to arrive, each father with his child making his heart beat faster. "Jack?" Melissa's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, wearing a casual dress and sneakers, so different from the executive he had seen in the office. But his eyes barely registered his ex-wife. They were fixed on the small being she carried in her arms. Sophia was wearing a little blue dress and had white bows in her golden curls. Her eyes, identical to her father's, observed the world with curiosity. When she saw Jack, she opened a spontaneous smile, the kind that only children can give. "Hi," was all he managed to say, his voice choked with emotion. Melissa approached slowly, sitting on the bench beside him. Sophia, in her lap, continued to look at Jack with interest. "Sophia," Melissa said softly, "this is your daddy." The word daddy echoed in Jack's ears like a long-forgotten melody. Sophia tilted her head, still smiling, and reached out her tiny hand towards him. "She's always been very sociable," Melissa commented, her voice soft. "Do you want to hold her?" Jack nodded, nervous, and Melissa gently transferred Sophia into his arms. The weight of the girl, so light and yet so significant, made his heart race. Sophia immediately grabbed his tie, fascinated by the shiny fabric. "Da," she exclaimed, pulling the tie hard. "She's starting to talk," Melissa explained, her eyes watery. "Mama, Dada, water," the basic words. Jack barely heard. He was completely mesmerized by his daughter, by every little gesture, every expression. Sophia had his eyebrows, the shape of his eyes, but her smile was just like Melissa's. She was a perfect combination of the two. "I brought something for you, princess," he said, showing the teddy bear. Sophia's eyes lit up when she saw the toy, and she immediately grabbed it, abandoning the tie. The bear went straight to her, mouth like everything at that age. "She's teething," Melissa commented with a smile. "Everything becomes a teether." They spent the morning in the park, Sophia alternating between her father's and mother's arms, exploring the world around her with the curiosity typical of her age. Jack discovered that his daughter loved flowers, tried to catch all the little birds she saw, and had a contagious laugh. "Want to try giving her a snack?" Melissa asked when it was time for the baby food. Jack nodded, nervous but determined. Sophia, sitting on his lap, opened her mouth like a little bird whenever the spoon approached, making an adorable mess with the fruit puree. "You're a natural," Melissa observed, taking some photos with her phone. "She's amazing," Jack replied, gently cleaning Sophia's face. "How could I have missed so much of her life?" Melissa touched his arm softly. "You're here now, that's what matters." Sophia, oblivious to the adults' conversation, played with her new bear, babbling words that only she understood. Suddenly, she reached out towards Jack, asking to be picked up. "Da. She recognizes you as her father," Melissa said, emotional. "I showed her so many pictures of you." Jack hugged his daughter, feeling the soft baby scent, the warmth of her small body, the absolute trust with which she snuggled into his arms. At that moment, all doubts and conflicts seemed to diminish in the face of the simplicity of that newly discovered love. "I need to come back," he finally said, looking at Melissa. "To the company, to our family. Sophia deserves to have her father around." Melissa nodded, understanding. "And what about your other life?" Jack thought of Sarah, the restaurant, everything he had experienced in the last few months. "Some choices are made by us. Others are made by fate." The sun was getting stronger, indicating that the morning was coming to an end. Sophia, tired from playing, was napping in her father's arms, the new bear firmly grasped. "Can we do this more often?" Jack asked, reluctant to hand the sleeping child back to Melissa. "Of course," she smiled. Sophia needs to know the wonderful father you can be. Melissa's words echoed Sarah's, making his heart ache. Two very different women, both seeing in him something that he himself was still discovering. I'll resolve the company issues this week, he said, helping Melissa organize Sophia's things. I need to put everything in order. One step at a time, Melissa advised. Sophia isn't going anywhere. We're here for you. Before saying goodbye, Sophia woke up briefly, opening her sleepy eyes. She looked at Jack and smiled, that pure and sincere smile that only children can give. "Da," she said once more, before falling back asleep in her mother's arms. Jack stayed in the park long after Melissa and Sophia left, watching other families, other fathers with their children. He took out his phone and looked at the photo Melissa had sent, him and Sophia laughing together, a perfect moment captured forever. His fingers hovered over Sarah's number. He needed to tell her about this day, about his decision. She, more than anyone, deserved to know first. But some conversations need to be had in person. Some stories need to be closed with the respect they deserve. The midday sun found Jack walking through the park, his heart lighter and at the same time heavier. He had found his daughter, rediscovered, a crucial part of his life, but he knew that difficult decisions awaited him. The teddy bear that Sophia had left with him still carried the warmth of her little hands, a tangible reminder that his life would never be the same again. The sun was setting when Jack arrived at Joe's restaurant. The establishment was closed, but a soft light coming from the kitchen indicated that Sarah was still there, probably organizing everything for the next day, as she always did. He used his key, the one Sarah had given him months ago when he was still just Michael, to enter. The familiar tinkling of the bell above the door announced his arrival, and Sarah emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "How was it?" she asked softly, her face illuminated by the golden light of the sunset coming through the windows. Jack took his phone out of his pocket and showed her the photo of Sophia. Sarah came closer to see better, a genuine smile forming on her lips. "She's beautiful," she said, her voice heavy with sincere emotion. "And she looks a lot like you." "She's perfect," Jack replied, putting the phone away. "Sarah, Wait," she gently interrupted him. "I made coffee. Let's have one last cup together?" He nodded, following her to the small table at the back of the restaurant, the same one where they had shared so many conversations, so many moments. Sarah served the coffee in 2 old cups, the ones Joe kept for special occasions. "You, Sano," she began, sitting down. "When I found you that night, I thought I was just helping someone in need. I didn't imagine you would change my life too." Jack held his cup, feeling the familiar warmth between his fingers. "You saved me, Sarah. You didn't just give me a roof, but you showed me a world I didn't know. You taught me about simplicity, about true kindness. And you taught me that sometimes we need to let go of what we love," she replied, her eyes shining with contained tears. "Your daughter needs you, Jack. The company, your family. You're important to me too," he interrupted, his voice choked. "What we lived here in these months was real." Sarah reached out across the table, gently touching his hand. "It was real. Every moment. And that's why we need to end this story the right way." The silence that followed was filled by the distant sound of the city and the aroma of the coffee they shared. Through the window, they could see the sky being tinged with shades of purple and orange, a spectacle they had admired together so many times. "Joe will miss you," Sarah finally said, trying to ease the tension. "I think he was already planning to pass the restaurant on to you when he retired." Jack smiled, remembering the old man and his gruff ways that barely hid a huge heart. "I'll miss him too. All of this, the smell of coffee in the morning, the doorbell, your plants in the window. Life is funny," Sarah reflected, playing with the empty cup. "Sometimes it gives us exactly what we need, even if it's not what we expected. You needed to get lost to find yourself, Jack. And I needed to find you to learn that some loves are like shooting stars. They shine intensely, but we can't hold on to them." Jack felt his heart tighten with the simple and true poetry of her words. "Sarah, I want you to know, No, she interrupted him again, a sad smile on her lips. Don't say it. Some things are more beautiful when they remain in the silence of what we could have been. She got up, walking to the small cabinet where she kept her belongings. She returned with a modest box which she placed on the table. Your things, she explained. The clothes we bought, some books, and this. She took out of the box a small plant in an improvised pot, one of the many she cultivated in the kitchen window. So you don't forget that sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the most unlikely places. Jack took the pot, recognizing the plant he had helped water so many mornings. I'll never forget, Sarah, never. I know, she smiled, wiping away a stubborn tear. Now go. Your daughter is waiting for her father. He stood up, holding the box with his few possessions and the plant Sarah had given him. Before leaving, he turned one last time. Sarah, I know, she repeated, her smile now firmer. Me too. The doorbell rang for the last time as Jack left. Sarah remained standing in the middle of the empty restaurant, the last lights of the day dancing on the walls. Joe, who had arrived silently from the back, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Sometimes, the old man said with his simple wisdom, the truest love is the one we know to let go. Sarah nodded, wiping away the tears that now flowed freely. She walked to the window, watching Jack's silhouette disappear around the corner. The plant she had given him would leave an empty space on the windowsill, but her heart knew that this was how it should be. On the sidewalk, Jack paused for a moment, looking at the plant in his hands. A new leaf was beginning to sprout, promising growth and renewal, just like his life, which was now taking a new direction, carrying with it the lessons and love he had found in that small neighborhood restaurant. The sky was completely starry when he finally got into the car that Aurora had sent. In the back seat, along with the box of his things and Sarah's plant, was a folder with company documents and some photos of Sophia. His past and his future united in the same space, ready to write the next chapter of his story. The conference room of the Elliott Group was packed that morning. Executives in impeccable suits occupied the leather chairs around the mahogany table, their tense expressions revealing the importance of the moment. At the head of the table, Jack adjusted his tie. Not the same one Sophia had pulled in the park, but a new one chosen especially for this occasion. Gentlemen, he began, his firm voice echoing through the room, in the last few days I've reviewed every aspect of our operations, and I've come to some important conclusions. Aurora, seated to his right, smiled discreetly. In the last 2 weeks, she had witnessed Jack's transformation, not just his return to the group's presidency, but a deeper change in his way of seeing business and life. Our company has always been known for its excellence and results, he continued, walking around the room. But at some point we lost something essential, our humanity. A murmur ran through the table. Jack raised his hand, asking for silence. During my absence, I had the opportunity to see the world from a completely different perspective. I saw people like Joe, owner of a small restaurant, treating his employees like family. I saw Sarah, a woman who, even with few resources, opened her heart and her home to help a stranger. He stopped in front of the panoramic window, observing the city stretching out below. Somewhere in that sea of buildings was the restaurant where he had learned his most valuable lessons. From today, we will implement significant changes. First, an expanded benefits program for all employees, from the factory floor to the board. Second, a support fund for small business owners, offering microcredit and mentoring. The executives exchanged surprised looks. This was not the same. Jack they knew before, the man focused only on numbers and results. But sir, one of the directors interrupted, this will significantly impact our short-term profits. Jack smiled, a smile that carried the wisdom acquired in his months as Michael. Sometimes the best harvests come from seeds planted with patience and care, he replied, remembering the plants that Sarah cultivated with such affection. We're no longer just building a company, we're building a legacy. The meeting continued for hours with Jack presenting every detail of his new vision for the group. By the end, even the most skeptical seemed convinced that this transformation could be positive for everyone. When the room finally emptied, Aurora remained, watching Jack organize his notes. "You know," she commented, "when we found you in that restaurant, I feared you wouldn't be able to resume your position here. Now I see that you needed that experience to become a better leader." Jack nodded, picking up the photo frame he now kept on his desk, a picture of him with Sophia in the park, the girl laughing as he lifted her in the air. "I learned that success isn't measured just by numbers on a balance sheet," he replied. "It's measured by the impact we have on people's lives." He left the office early that day. He had an important commitment. Sophia was waiting for him for a walk in the park. In recent days, he had established a routine with his daughter. Afternoons in the park, dinners with Melissa, precious moments building a relationship that, although late, was growing strong and true. On the way, he passed through the neighborhood where Joe's restaurant was located. He didn't go in. He knew that some stories need time to heal. But he smiled, seeing movement in the establishment, imagining Sarah among the customers, her gentle smile illuminating the environment, as it always did. In his new apartment, the plant Sarah had given him occupied a special place on the balcony. It had grown, developed new buds adapting to the new environment just as he had. Every morning before leaving for work, he watered it carefully, a ritual that kept him connected to the lessons he had learned. Melissa noticed the change in him too. During the moments they shared with Sophia, they talked about the future, about how to raise their daughter with the values that really mattered. "You're different," she commented one day, watching him play with Sophia. "More present, more human." Jack smiled, helping Sophia take her first steps on the park lawn. "Let's say I needed to get lost to really find myself." The Elliott Group was also beginning to show the first signs of transformation. The new policies implemented by Jack, although initially viewed with skepticism, were beginning to generate positive results. More engaged employees, a more humane corporate culture, a sense of purpose that went beyond profits. One afternoon, while signing the documents for the creation of the Elliott Foundation, a project that would offer educational opportunities for low-income youth, Jack found one of his old business cards. He compared it with the new, freshly printed one, which now carried not only his name and position, but also the company's new motto, "Building Value Through People." The transformation was complete. He was no longer just Jack Elliott, the businessman, nor Michael, the restaurant employee. He was a new version of himself, carrying the best of both worlds, the competence of the executive and the heart of the man who had found humanity in simplicity. Sophia, who now spent some days of the week with him, had her own little corner in the new apartment, a simple but welcoming space, decorated with the teddy bear from that first meeting and photos that recorded every precious moment they shared. "Da!" she called, her still unsteady steps running in his direction whenever she saw him. And in that smile, in that unconditional love, Jack found the certainty that all the twists and turns of his life had a greater purpose. A year had passed since Jack had regained his memory. Autumn painted the streets of New York with golden hues, and Central Park was especially beautiful that Saturday morning. Sophia, now 2 years old, ran across the lawn chasing soap bubbles, her golden curls dancing in the wind. "More, Daddy, more bubbles," she shouted, her crystalline laughter echoing through the air. Jack blew more bubbles, watching his daughter try to catch them with her small hands. Melissa, sitting on a nearby bench, smiled as she photographed the scene. In recent months, they had found a comfortable balance in their relationship as parents, united by unconditional love for their daughter. "Look who's here for your little party, Sophia," Melissa called, pointing to a group approaching. Helen, Sophia's grandmother, was in front, carrying a decorated cake. Behind her, Aurora and Richard brought colorful packages. The small celebration of Sophia's 2nd birthday was just beginning, but there were more guests arriving. Jack smiled to see Joe approaching, carrying a basket that certainly contained his famous pastries, now a delicacy requested at all Elliott family events. And then his heart quickened slightly to see who was coming right behind. Sarah, more beautiful than ever in a simple but elegant dress, carrying a vase with a flowering plant, her trademark. "Sarah!" Sophia shouted, running in her direction. The girl had developed a special affection for her in recent months, since Jack had made a point of including her in family events. "Hello, Princess," Sarah smiled, crouching down to hug the little one. "I brought a special gift for you, a little plant just like your dad's." Sophia clapped her hands, delighted. At 2 years old, she already demonstrated the same love for plants as Sarah, always helping Jack take care of that first seedling that now bloomed on his balcony. The impromptu party in the park organized itself naturally. Mr. Johnson distributed pastries, telling anyone who would listen how his restaurant had been transformed after Jack, or Michael as I knew him, implemented some changes in management. Indeed, Johnson's restaurant was now a success story, one of the first beneficiaries of the Elliott Group's small business support program. It had expanded, maintaining its original charm but adding efficiency and modernity. Sarah, who was now studying nursing thanks to a scholarship from the Elliott Foundation, chatted animatedly with Melissa about her studies. The two women, so different in their origins but so similar in their essence, had developed a genuine friendship. "Sometimes," Melissa commented to Jack as they watched Sophia play with her new plants, "I think your disappearance was a gift in disguise. Look at how much good came from something that seemed like a tragedy." Jack nodded, thoughtful. The Elliott Group had transformed over the past year. Its new policies of social responsibility and human value had not only improved the lives of employees, but also significantly increased the company's results. "I learned that sometimes we need to lose everything to understand what really matters," he replied, observing the diverse group that gathered to celebrate his daughter. Sophia, the center of attention, alternated between the laps of her extended family: Grandma Helen, who had softened considerably after everything that happened; Amanda, who had become a sort of doting aunt; Mr. Johnson, who treated her like a granddaughter. "Dad, Sarah," Sophia called, wanting to show how she could already water her new plant by herself. Sarah approached, helping the girl with the small watering can. Jack observed the scene, his heart at peace. The love he had felt for Sarah had transformed into something different but no less special, a deep friendship based on mutual gratitude and respect. "You know," Sarah commented later, while helping to clean up the party remnants, "when I found you that night, I thought I was just helping someone. I never imagined I was starting a story that would change so many lives." "Including yours," Jack smiled, noticing the nursing school badge on her bag. "How are your studies going?" "Intense," she laughed, "but each day I feel more certain that this was my path. Thank you for making it possible." "You gave me much more, Sarah. You taught me the value of small things, of selfless kindness. That knowledge is worth more than any fortune." Sophia, tired from playing so much, fell asleep in Melissa's arms. The afternoon was coming to an end, and the guests were starting to say goodbye. Helen kissed her sleeping granddaughter, whispering goodnight. Mr. Johnson left with his empty basket, promising more pastries at the next gathering. Sarah was the last to leave. Before departing, she stopped beside Jack, watching the sunset that painted the sky pink and orange. "Ah, you happy?" she asked simply. Jack looked at his sleeping daughter, at Melissa organizing the gifts, at the remnants of a party that celebrated not just a birthday, but the unlikely union of people that fate had brought together in unexpected ways. "More than I ever imagined possible," he answered honestly. Sarah smiled, that smile that had once welcomed him on his darkest night. Then our story had the ending it should have. When everyone left, Jack remained a moment in the park with Sophia and Melissa. His daughter, still sleeping, held firmly onto the small plant that Sarah had given her. In his bag was the key to his new office, no longer on the isolated top floor of the tallest building, but on a middle floor, with doors always open for those who needed. The sun was setting on the New York horizon, and Jack thought about how life had curious ways of teaching its most valuable lessons. He had lost everything, memory, identity, position, to gain something much more precious, the understanding of the true meaning of wealth, family, and love. Sophia stirred in her sleep, murmuring disconnected words. In her small fingers, she still clutched a petal from the flower Sarah had brought. Jack smiled, thinking about how that small flower so well represented his own journey, from darkness to light, from forgetting to remembering, from loneliness to a family that transcended. "Blood ties, shall we go home?" Melissa asked softly. "Yes," he replied, his heart at peace. "Let's go home." Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Jack, Sarah, and Sophia has touched your hearts. To continue this journey of emotions and discoveries, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here, clicking on the left. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Share with us in the comments which moment of the story touched your heart the most. Every day we bring new narratives that explore the complexity and beauty of life. Continue with us on this journey of emotions.